So, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth Lunch and Learn session. Happy New Year for those of you that I've not had a chance to speak to this year. I'm super excited to be starting 2022 with you all, and great to welcome back those of you that have joined the previous sessions, and lovely to see some new names also on the chat. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tarvinder Puri. I am the founding director of a consultancy called ADP Advisory Services, based here in Tanzania. So I have spent the last 23 years within the field of human resources, and I'm really passionate about my world. And the reason that I've started the Lunch and Learn sessions was an opportunity for me to share my knowledge, skills, and experiences with my peers and with people who are just have an interest in HR. So today's session, I'm super excited about because this topic of wellness, I believe, is something that has been spoken about and has come to the forefront more recently during the pandemic. And I've had many leaders come to talk to me about the challenges behind how we support our teams, particularly in this agenda. So just to give you a bit of context around how we structure the Lunch and Learns, for those of you who are not new to these sessions, is I would normally, over the course of the next 20 minutes, talk about a particular topic. So for today's topic, for the Lunch and Learn, we are talking about the importance of wellness. And I have a colleague, Asha Berzon, is going to be joining the session. Now, she is by profession a clinical hypnotherapist who's been supporting businesses to thrive by engaging their staff in preventative support solutions around this wellness space. So she's just in the process of dialing in. So until she does so, I just wanted to explain to you a little bit more about what wellness means to me, because I can believe it's a bit of a title which doesn't necessarily allude to everything that encompasses it. So for me, wellness actually means developing a healthy workplace culture to enhance employees' well-being and improve the business's performance. Now, for me, what does that actually mean? So over the course of the last 20 odd years, I've had experience of working with specialists, because for those of you that know me, I am by training a generalist. So as a HR generalist, I have experience in all sectors to do with an employee, from how you recruit them, to how you retrain them, to how you remunerate them, all the way through to how you dismiss them. And the agenda around wellness is a specialism. So I would normally tap into the expertise of a subject matter expert in that space when I would find myself wanting or needing the support around wellness. Hence why I've asked my friend Asha to join today. So for me, wellness covers a whole range of different areas. So they come across from being health and well-being, such as promoting educational flu vaccine, right through to hydration awareness, particularly here in Tanzania, where it's so important, right through to the impact of alcohol consumption. I also see well-being as being a strategy to help people understand the importance of nutrition and how that can affect your well-being. And encompassed within that, I've also identified that wellness includes mental resilience. And how do we manage that stress and anxiety that both leaders and employees feel? Now, from a personal perspective and some of the reading that I have done around this space, post-pandemic, we are noticing a heightened increase in anxiety levels across society as a whole. So what do I mean by that? So we're also noticing trends and patterns in anxiety levels for students who might not have been able to rejoin classes physically and have had to work remotely, which has been challenging for some. That also manifests in it's how some teachers might be responding to the pandemic and having to change the way that they work. And compounded into that is some of the anxiety that parents have also felt, because the structured routine that their child might have experienced previously by going to school has also been disrupted. And they've got to juggle that complexity on top of their day job. So for me, wellness encompasses a whole host of issues. And this is why I am delighted to have my friend and colleague, Asha, join the session today. So we had a conversation last year and I came away from it really so proud of what you've done in this space. So having gained so much experience working in very challenging environments within the UK, closely, you've then decided to set up your own practice and provide support to leaders with your expertise. Now, for people that know me, it's all about being there, getting the t-shirt and then saying to people, this is what I did, and sharing that experience rather than reading a textbook and saying, this is what I would do. So I'm now going to hand you over to my friend Asha, who will introduce herself and explain to you what was her journey into this space. Then I've got some questions that I'm going to pose for her for the remainder of the 20 minutes, and then I'll open it up for Q&A on the chat. So welcome. Oh, you're mute. Let's get you unmuted. Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I did try to unmute myself and it said no, only Tarvinder can do that. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on. My journey, wow. I'll keep it as brief as I can because I know when you and I met, Tarvinder, it went on for a good few hours when we started talking. But my background is criminal justice. I've worked in the criminal justice field for about 17 years. And, it's the kind of field that you go into because you have a passion for it. It's not a monetary gain that you get from it really that drives you. And I worked my way up through the organization, and my last 5 years in the organization was spent as a senior manager managing a multidisciplinary and rather large team. And unfortunately, with these type of events for pretty much all of us, when our work life is hectic, we need our personal life to be quite stable. And when our personal life is hectic, we need our work life to be stable because the amount of energy it takes from us, both mentally and physically. And unfortunately, I had a couple of things that happened to me on a personal level, and work combined with the personal things that I was trying to manage became too difficult. And I ended up experiencing burnout. And in hindsight, I recognized that a lot had to do with the fact that I was experiencing high functioning anxiety, which then meant I was a real perfectionist and I would always put myself out there and I would take on extra responsibilities at work. I was, like I said, I had one of the largest teams in the southeast of the UK at the time. And unfortunately, like I said, I experienced burnout. And so I was signed off with work-related stress for something in the region of sort of on and off for about 6 months. And during that time, I had other issues that I was managing and dealing with. And eventually, when I did feel that I was looking for some support, I spoke to my manager, and the only thing that was available to me at that time was CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, which I duly took up, but it was just awful for me. Now, I fully accept that it works really well for some people, but it wasn't appropriate and suitable for me and my experiences at that time. And so unfortunately, I had to go away and find my own source of therapy and counseling, and I picked hypnotherapy, and it was brilliant. It was such a life-changing decision on many levels. And it was the first time I really began to understand that the environment and the way that I engage with the environment, the decisions that I make, were actually having an impact on my mental well-being. And this was then starting to manifest for me on a physical level, and it will manifest for many of us in a physical sense. And it's usually that makes us stop and tells us that something's not right. We tend to ignore the mental signs, the psychological signs, the emotional signs. Oh, I'm tired, or I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. But as soon as we get those chest pains, we get those migraines, it's essentially our brain saying you need to stop. So I retrained as a hypnotherapist, and I left my career in the criminal justice behind. And my passion absolutely is to, I don't want businesses to experience what my organization did, which is essentially they lost a very skilled and experienced worker. I had 17 years of working with a very specific group of individuals, 17 years of training that was lost. I was a manager, so they lost a manager. They lost that expertise. But also from my perspective, I lost my career that I actually really loved and had a lot of faith in. And so retraining as a hypnotherapist gave me another avenue to be able to support people to have change, but do it in a different way, do it in a much more constructive way. So now what I do is I have two strands to my business. I support businesses to understand and individuals, so staff, to recognize what stress cues look like for them. I help individuals to understand what can happen to them when they're experiencing stress, both physiologically, so in their body, but equally in their mind, and what people can do to start looking after themselves. So there's a real recognition of accountability. And had I known what I know now, I would have been looking after myself so much better.
That's an amazing journey and an amazing story. And thank you for sharing it. Because I know when we met, you were saying how difficult it was when you were experiencing it yourself. So in the Tanzanian market, which is obviously where I'm based, and I know we've got callers from around the world, and Asha, obviously you're based in the UK, which is a more developed market. The agenda around wellness is not really understood that well. It's kind of coming into the fore of HR, but not quite there yet. So my question to you is, how do we make sure that leaders are aware what to do and what to look out for? Because it's quite difficult, right? As a leader, if somebody comes to, without even saying to you, I'm stressed, but you can identify some of the things that you've just described. What advice would you give them?
And it is very difficult. And I think a lot of this has to do with the culture that we create. And the culture that I'm talking about is one that is not just about the policies. So it's great to have a policy that says, you know, we will support you if you're having an emotional or physical crisis. We will do everything that we can to endeavor and all of that. You know, that's all lovely. But it's also about creating a work culture whereby it's very much part and parcel of everyday conversation. You know, when you're having that cup of coffee, how are you? You don't look so great today, or you've been a little bit quieter over these last few days. And it doesn't have to be a real in-depth, I'm going to give you a counseling session conversation. Those real small little conversations. And I think it's also about ensuring that we're creating a culture where we're making it okay to talk about the subject matter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're not, and you know, I'm fairly sure you may have come across this expression, but mental health is a continuum. And we're all going to have moments where we feel great, but equally there are going to feel times where our mental health feels quite stretched. And so it can feel quite difficult, you know. And so taking that time to learn and know and get to know your staff, I think, is really important. Because if you get to know your staff, you'll then be able to recognize, oh, crikey, they're not, they've been very quiet today, or so-and-so's not been as sarcastic as often, or they haven't taken as many tea breaks. You know, just looking out for those little cues. And I think equally having or being familiar with people's personal responsibilities, because nobody leaves their personal life at the door when they leave.
Absolutely.
And so it's about having that awareness, you know, what else is going on for that individual outside of home. And with this whole pandemic that's been going on, particularly here in the UK, we've had bereavements, as I'm sure you've had in Tanzania. We've had bereavements.
Absolutely.
We've had restructuring. We've had businesses closing down. We've had the furlough scheme. So people are actually coming into work effectively carrying a lot on their shoulders. So taking the time to know your team. And I appreciate when you're a bigger organization, that can feel a bit more difficult. So ensuring that your managers have the skill set to do that, or have the space to do that. So knowing your team, recognizing when staff aren't feeling 100%, also recognizing what's going on for them outside of the work environment, I think is really important.
Yeah, especially when people are busy, because let's be honest, all our lives are busy, right?
Yeah, completely.
And sometimes it's something that you put on the back burner. You think, oh, I'll have that conversation with someone. I know they didn't see themselves. But what would you say are kind of your top 3 pieces of advice for leaders? I know you said to kind of look out for some of the physical, like for some of the symptoms, like them not being themselves. But are there any other flags which might be quite subliminal? Which, let's be honest, if you are busy in your day jobs, you might not recognize. Yeah. So what advice would you give us?
And again, that's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because when we're in our headspace of I'm busy and I need to get this piece of work done, those subtleties can be potentially lost. But it can be looking out for things like low motivation, standard of work. They're the more kind of obvious ones. And they're the ones, if you're somebody that is managing a very busy environment, they might be the first cues that demonstrate to you that something's potentially not right. I mean, we talked about this in terms of the change. People then start to become absent as well, potentially. Yes. So, and then I think what's really important to understand that, just as I mentioned, that sometimes what can happen is we can feel really mentally stretched, but we become almost accustomed to it. So as the individual, we become accustomed to, okay, it's very busy. There's been a pandemic, everyone's super busy, and I need to show that my employers that I'm doing the best that I can, and I'm going to keep on doing the best that I can. I feel really stretched at the moment, but I'm going to keep on doing it. What then unfortunately happens is that becomes the norm. And our body begins to operate, and mentally we begin to operate at this higher level. And then unfortunately, what can happen is, like I said, it will start to then represent for us physically. So we may get things like chest pains, migraines, alopecia. We get things like IBS, which is so notoriously linked to stress and chronic stress. And so if your staff are telling you, I've had more IBS flare-ups, or I've been experiencing more migraines, or I'm experiencing even more tension in my muscles and my joints, or my arthritis has flared up. These are the other kind of little cues that you will pick up. And like I said, if you're in a busy environment, they might be the first telltale signs that you'll look out for or see.
That's great. And also from my experience, a lot of leaders have asked me and said, Tarvinder, I think somebody's underperforming in my team, not necessarily delivering on all cylinders. But when I start having those conversations, they go off sick. So how, as a leader, can you make that call to decide when a performance issue is actually manifesting itself in stress, or when is an underperforming issue actually because somebody's not delivering in their role? So what advice would you give us?
I think in that instance, it very much comes down to looking at the policies and procedures that you also have in place.
Which you need to have. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about how we bring that conversation in, isn't it? And having that very humanistic, real simple conversation, rather than that, you haven't met your targets this week or last week. What's going on? I'm really concerned. But rather more so, look, I'm a little bit concerned. You're not seeming yourself. And I've noticed that your motivation has dipped. Is there something that we can do to support you? And I think if you don't want to lose your staff, support is a really key element. What can I do to support you, rather than making the assumption that whatever it is that you're going to offer is going to work for them. So being prepared to have that conversation. And we all know about the, conscious competence grid. So checking out as well, do you have the right training to be able to do what it is that you need to do? And so it's about having those conversations and having that awareness of what's going on for the individual, Because so for example, if you're working with somebody, so I'll give you an example. I was working with an organization, and one of their associates, one of their members of staff, was in quite a volatile relationship, and she came out of that relationship. And during that time, her level of motivation and productivity did dip naturally. And so I began working with this individual on a one-to-one basis to get her to a place where she would feel much more confident and capable. Now, she's a capable member of staff because we know historically she's always managed to do the work, so looking at what else is going on for that person. If that person has joined the organization and they've always struggled, then I think there's a competency issue, potentially.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we make that distinction. Is this because somebody's always done really, has always managed to perform, do everything that's been asked of them, do the job to a good standard, and now they're not? What is going on? And I think coming at it very much from a human, compassionate place. What can I do to help you? What is going on? I've noticed your motivation has dropped.
And what about the other factors that I talked about? Things like strategies around nutritional support, advice around health and well-being, such as understanding and educating people around things like alcohol consumption. Where does that fit into this space?
I think they're all really important factors, because ultimately I've had several conversations here in the UK with businesses where sometimes the thrust can be that, well, actually, that's what people do outside of work and that's not our responsibility. Unfortunately, yes, I get that. But equally, if your productivity is dropping by 70%, or if your members of staff are now reporting and not being able to come into work because they've had that alcohol consumption, and it's happening on a frequent basis, because we're now talking about a dependency. All of these are really, really important aspects. And actually, they can be training events. Providing that basic education is more beneficial to the organization than it's going to be detrimental.
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing to remember, and that's why I talked about that 70%, we know here in the UK, 70% of staff won't tell their employers if they're struggling.
Wow, that's an amazing statistic.
Yeah, it's quite high. It's quite a high statistic. We know that nearly 70% will not tell their employers that they're struggling because they're concerned about the repercussions. And that not coping can present in many different ways. It can be because of not eating so well, lack of education around that, because they're developing poor coping strategies. So substance misuse, which is why we're talking about alcohol consumption as well. So all of these have a very important role to play, and they can be delivered as basic education or training events.
That's fascinating, because it all feeds into your culture. So if you say 70% of employees are reluctant to share that they're feeling stressed and anxious with their employer, that feeds into that culture of distrust, disengagement, and that's why it's even more important that as leaders, we adapt our style and we know what pain points to look out for when this is manifesting itself in. I'm just going to quickly go to the chat, Asha, and see if we've got any questions in there, because I'm just very conscious of the time. And again, the chat facility is if anybody's been listening during the session and a thought's been prompted that they want to expand on, that's normally what we use that for. But whilst the questions are coming through, I'm just really interested to learn from you as an expert in this field. What do you see as the trends coming up in 2022 and beyond in the space around wellness?
I would very much say that there is a real drive now for preventative work. Here in the UK, unfortunately, for the last 5 or 6 years or so, or probably even longer, we have the employment assist programs. And so it's reactive. We're very much moving now towards that preventative work. So why are we waiting for people to get unwell?
Mm-hmm.
Why not give people that basic education so they can look after themselves? So, for example, here in the UK, one of the things that's a real kind of upward trend is educating individuals around menopause.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's a real trend around understanding and knowing how menopause impacts upon women, and then equally how that impacts upon how they're going to function at work.
Very interesting.
Absolutely. So there's a real trend towards preventative now. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's really powerful.
And I've just got a question in the chat that I'd really like your view on, because I know you, in your capacity, have worked with HR professionals and other departments across the organizations that you've worked in. So how do, as HR professionals, we get employers to understand the importance of raising these issues around wellness? Because sometimes it can be put on the back burner. So what advice would you give us?
And I think it's really important that mental wellness, physical wellness, financial wellness, emotional wellness is very much a thread that kind of goes all throughout the organization. And I think that's why work culture is quite an important aspect. Because I think quite traditionally what tends to happen is if somebody's unwell, they go off sick, HR and the manager deal with it. Yeah. And rightly so, it should. Equally, though, why not create a culture where we're saying it's okay to talk about, I'm actually having a bit of a rough ride today. I've had a bit of a tough time today, because we don't have to be in a space where we've been diagnosed with mental health conditions. And that's where I'm talking about that preventative work, because if we can support individuals when they're saying, I'm feeling today, I'm feeling a bit stretched today. How can my colleagues support me? Or if I go to my manager, how can my manager support me to enable me to be productive as I possibly can, but equally at the same time, not put me under undue pressure?
Yeah, I agree entirely. We just had another comment in the chat from Bhakti who said, education is a critical aspect to alleviate the stigma around mental health. Absolutely. Raising employee awareness is the key here, and it's okay to not be okay. And stress-related manifestations result in long-term chronic conditions, right, due to huge risks to the organizations. And we have to change the culture of running to the doctor and for them to take charge. Great advice. And I know in your world, Asha, this is what you do. So you provide advice in this capacity because you've been there yourself, you've done it, right? And this is what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I love doing. I love talking to businesses and getting them to move away from that reactive, oh, well, a member of staff's unwell, they've run to the GP, they're taking time out. It's about creating that cultural shift. Why are we not all learning about how our brain works? Why are we not all learning about those simple strategies that we can take and put into place to look after ourselves? Why are we not then having those conversations openly? So it does remove the stigma. And also, I think on one of the slides as well, that I think managers are great role models. They have the capacity to be great role models and to be able to say, actually, I've had quite a challenging day today, because then we're setting that precedence that it's absolutely okay to say, today has felt tough. What can I do to look after myself?
And I love this slide that you shared with me about well-being being the golden thread which pulls all aspects of the business together: policies, work culture, and supports open conversations. I think that's a great one for us to kind of round the session on. But give me your take on that, because I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, that is pretty much, I think I sent that to Natasha. That is exactly how I feel about mental wellness. That's exactly how I feel about our physical wellness. It absolutely should underpin everything that we do, because ultimately our businesses cannot thrive if our staff, our employees, are not well. There is no business without our biggest asset. Our biggest asset is not our IT, our what's the other stuff called? The equipment. It's our staff. It's our staff that are going to make our business, because it's our staff that are going to be the ones that will say, yes, I'm going to make this business grow for you.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for
No, thank
sharing the
you.
time today and for joining us. I really, really enjoyed the session. And I think we
Thank
could have
you.
talked for like at
Oh, yeah.
least half an hour longer. So actually, I'm going to end the session today. There's definitely merit in us talking and taking this conversation further. So I'd love to have you back
Great.
as my special
I'd love
guest
to.
and in the future. And we could talk about preventative measures as well that we could introduce. But thank you for your time. Thank you for everybody that joined in today and giving up your lunch hour. If you've got any suggestions for future Lunch and Learns, please feel free to add them to the comments box today for the chat, or just send me an email and say, Tarvinder, I'm really keen to learn about this. So have a great start to the new year. For me, it's been super amazing and I've really, really enjoyed today. So thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye.
You take care. Bye.